Hi folks, welcome to RJA Impact. Today we're going to be talking about week 15 in the Holmes Theranos trial. You can search this channel for previous week's updates and also for a more detailed video on the background to Theranos and Holmes' journey to the point at which this trial commenced. Please don't forget to like this video if you do and subscribe to the channel, and if you hit the notification button you won't miss out on any future videos or updates when they're published. As a reminder, Elizabeth Holmes is in court accused of multiple instances of fraud against doctors, patients and investors in connection with her role as CEO of Theranos, and this is week 15 of that trial.
I'm the founder and CEO of this company. Anything that happens in this company is my responsibility at the end of the day.
Before we get to the testimony this week, we'll take a little meander down a couple of avenues to provide a bit of extra material which is relevant now that the trial is drawing to a conclusion. Background bonus. There was actually a court hearing on Friday last week. This was without the jury and was for the prosecution and defence to agree on some of the ways that the instructions on the indictments should be presented to the jury. There is a model that's been prepared upon which instructions should be based, and this is called the Ninth Circuit Model Instructions. Now, from what I've gathered, there was a lot of wranglings about the meanings of certain words in this case. Some of the defence counsel comments to me were quite surprising. For example, they say that there is not enough done to explain presumed innocent and beyond reasonable doubt. Now, I've not read the Ninth Circuit Model Instructions myself, but surely those two phrases alone are pretty much at the heart of the criminal justice system. How on earth can these be lacking in explanation? Perhaps the defence here wants something more, and it wasn't explained exactly what, but really these phrases surely are very fundamental. The judge broke through this to some extent to say that this was just a high-level discussion, and thank goodness for that. The next substantive piece is the defence saying that there should be separate instructions for the fraud against patients versus the fraud against investors. And this is because they're saying the nature and mechanics of the alleged frauds are different. Now, the prosecution are saying essentially, nah, keep them together. Keep the instructions short and sweet. Well, that's my interpretation of their comments anyway. Discussion on the meanings of the word willingness and willful, scheme to defraud, good faith, and ultimately the defence are saying expand on the instructions for all these phrases, and the prosecution are saying keep it simple. Now, ultimately the judge will decide on all this, and we'll see the outcome when the final jury instructions are provided. Dates. Well, in yet another change of possible dates for the end of the trial, the judge has said the jury will get the case on the 20th. Leach for the prosecution is saying at least by the 17th. Well, your guess is as good as mine. My prediction, for what it's worth anyway, is that they won't get it on the 25th of December. Prayer. There have been a few comments on what is the acronym HMFR in the texts between Holmes and Bawani. Well, this relates to a short prayer or saying which is Hada min fadli Rabbi, this by the grace of my Lord, or this is by the grace of my Lord. It originates from the Quran and was spoken by Solomon originally. Now, I'm not sure what religion Holmes practices, but Bawani was brought up a Hindu. I'm assuming that this phrase was just something that gelled with them in their loved up years, and then became a personal epithet between them characterising their relationship. Anyway, I learned something today by looking that up. And so to the trial. The prosecution's cross-examination continued on Tuesday. Now that's the 7th of December. Somebody pointed out it makes sense to actually quote the date, else it's any Tuesday at all. I'm going to improve on that suggestion and state that it is in the year 2021. How about that, hey? Now, no confusion. Very sensible suggestion, by the way, thanks. Leach asked Holmes whether Theranos devices were ever put on military helicopters. She agreed that they weren't. He asked her several times in several ways whether she told investors that Theranos analyzers were in the battlefield or Afghanistan. I don't think I did, says Holmes. But Roger Parloff, investors, Grossman, Tolbert, Peterson and Safeway CEO Steve Bird all said that she did. Again, I don't think I did, Holmes replies. Holmes agreed that she was kept appraised as to what was going on in the CIA lab and got updates on a regular basis. Examples were shown from VP Daniel Young that backed this up. She knew that Theranos were buying and using third-party analyzers to do tests, and knew that they did around 30 tests in that lab in 2014-15 using fingerprint draws. A bit of a change of tack. She doesn't think that she told Lisa Peterson that Theranos projected $990 million of revenues in 2015. Leach then shows her projection where their pharma contracts were $990 million. Holmes replies somewhat evasively that they had a multi-million GSK contract, but that was years before. Leach then shows her an internal forecast of $113 million in revenues for 2015, hundreds of millions of dollars less than $990 million. Then, what did she tell hedge fund manager Grossman? She doesn't remember specifics, one of her usual responses, and wasn't therefore a part of the meeting with him. She'd sent a link to shareholders to Parloff's Fortune magazine article. She agreed that she never told Parloff that Theranos were using modified non-Theranos machines. She regrets this. "I do. I think I could have handled those communications differently," she says in response to Leach. Multiple statements in that article were incorrect, Holmes agrees. And for example, Theranos does not buy any analyzers from third parties. What about the statement Theranos currently offers more than 200 and is ramping up to offer more than 1,000 blood tests, all without the need for a syringe? Is this accurate? I believe now that it is not, she says. John Hopkins' due diligence report, which was prepared for Walgreens. Did you know it had a disclaimer? I don't, but I'm sure you'll tell me, Holmes says. The disclaimer actually says that the report is only for Walgreens, and this exchange seemed like it was going somewhere, but didn't. Leach just moved on. We then saw some texts between Balwani and Holmes where Holmes evidently knew about issues in the company. For example, missing Walgreens deadlines and other messages where Daniel Edlin, the project manager, tried to get her blessing on investor materials. She acknowledges that she could change anything on the slides if she wanted. Of course, she said. Holmes denied hiding from investors that Theranos used venous blood draws. Then another email from Holmes' brother Christian in respect of the BDT investors. He said that assumptions from Elizabeth Holmes are that we must not do a venous draw, and we cannot tell them that their order prompts venous if it does. Holmes acknowledges that she wanted to impress BDT. Essentially, Theranos had put together a plan on how to avoid giving venous draws. Now, an aside here, from commentators in court, this was pretty much the only time today that Holmes was visibly concerned and not too happy looking, and I guess it's because her brother was brought into this particular exchange. We saw an email from Bob Gordon, the General Counsel for Safeway, summarising a meeting with Holmes. Theranos does not have technical issues, contrary to the impression of some Safeway employees. We'd heard earlier in the trial that some Safeway employees were distinctly unimpressed with the trials going on in the Safeway rollout, so therefore Holmes must have told Bob Gordon that there was no issue in relation to these concerns. We heard earlier in the trial from Alan Rosendorf about areas where he was left out of the information loop on areas key to his role as a lab director. A specific instance of this was put to Holmes. In October 2014, there were exchanges between Bill Foege, board member, about work done on Ebola, which was a big scare at that time. Holmes wrote, "Wonderful Connect Friday. We have all our assay development teams working on bringing up the best combination of tests for Ebola," and another to the board about operationalizing Ebola. In an email from Rosendorf, he says, "Sonny Elizabeth, I'm hearing that Theranos intends to test samples to rule out or diagnose Ebola at 7373 Gateway. Can you please confirm that this is correct? If so, I am wondering why, as a lab director, I am not involved in the decision and planning. Thanks." Holmes writes back, "That is not correct. Who said this?" Well, there's a clear black and white lie here. Back to Walgreens. Did Theranos tell Walgreens they were having problems with tests? I don't think so, Holmes said. But didn't she say to Walgreens that there were problems with assays? I don't think so, she also said. Ian Gibbons. We were shown a PowerPoint where Gibbons had laid out a template for all the work Theranos wanted to do, and the date of this was February 2010. Extracts from the overview page here. System 4 will be capable. It is envisaged. The system will be broadly based. measurements per sample will be increased, etc., etc. Now, key to this, as you'll have gathered, is use of the future tense, but Leach said despite this, Theranos entered into talks with Safeway and Walgreens only in March the same year. There were lots more slides and a lot of details on problems and solutions. Some solutions showed that licensing would be required. In other words, Holmes was made aware of licensing requirements. We saw a patent that Leach was using to demonstrate that Holmes knew about them and that patents did not mean working devices. And apparently the one that we were shown was for Holmes' first ever patent. Unfortunately for Leach, in my opinion, this allowed Holmes to get the better in this exchange with a bit of mirth. Let's look at the patent here. Now, when this early patent was originally shown to Holmes, she chuckled at it. Leach pressed Holmes. "Theranos does not have such a device," she was asked. "Yet," she responded jokingly. The CMS inspection. During the CMS inspection in 2015, which was going very badly and Holmes was made aware of this, Holmes flew to Florida on a private jet to receive an award. The point being made by Leach is how can she derelict her post at such a key time when she knows the consequences of an adverse finding. For example, there were lots of toing and froing between her and her executive assistant on flight options, lunch, etc., etc. In other words, not much focus on the CMS inspection. At the exit interview with CMS, she was told that they could find immediate jeopardy as a conclusion. Now this is about as serious as it gets. Holmes doesn't remember. She says that she actually thought they were talking about what Theranos had done properly. Personally, I'm incredulous about this. How on earth can she believe that, let alone say it in court? Now, they eventually got the report in January 2016, and Balwani, as a result, from what Holmes says, was out by April 2016. Positive customer experience. We heard about a lady who took a Theranos test, and the test identified key issues. When she checked the results, she realised she had all the symptoms identified by the Theranos diagnostic. Her doctor then went on to diagnose tumours. Now this very good customer experience was shared internally as a Theranos success. And why did the prosecution bring this up? Well, the kicker in this story is that the test would have been done on a third-party machine and nothing to do with Theranos. And this also undermines the other positive testimony that the defence brought up in their original examination. Now, after the CMS report was published and leaked to the Wall Street Journal, the question to Holmes was, did she downplay the impact of it to Lisa Peterson, who, if you remember, was an investor representative. Holmes told Peterson that these were just disgruntled former employees, and Holmes' counsel also told Peterson the same. Holmes still doesn't remember, yet Peterson had earlier testified to this in court that Holmes had heard. Leach is incredulous at this answer. Now, just as an aside, last week Holmes kept using the "we are trying to protect trade secrets" as part of the rationale for her keeping certain information back and not being open with it. Leach said at one point testily, "We'll get to the trade secrets." Well, I don't think we ever did, because that was the end of the cross-examination. And we're back to the defence. Cash crunch. Down it went back to the cash crunch period in 2013 that the prosecution had maintained gave rise to an incentive to mislead investors. Now, the defence established at the time Theranos knew it had $75 million coming from the Walgreens partnership and hence played down this assertion. And that pretty much wrapped things up for Tuesday, and we got back to things on Wednesday. The defence dotted from subject to subject in their final examination as they sought to rebut prosecution claims. Theranos capabilities. We saw an email from Dr. Gibbons to Holmes where he said that the Theranos 4.0 device could do a large number of lab assays. And then we got back to Roger Parloff's Fortune article. Holmes says that she never said that Theranos didn't buy third-party machines. The CMS report and audit. We heard that the CMS auditors asked if there were any new tests, and Rosendorf spoke about the lab-developed tests, LDTs, which do include non-Theranos devices. And we heard some more about the Balwani relationship. We saw 2 texts, Balwani to Holmes. Fundamentally, we need to stop fighting fires by not creating them. And then a little bit later, Holmes to Balwani. Fundamentally, we need to stop fighting fires by not creating them. Well, why did you repeat this back to Balwani? It was because I didn't want to ignite Sonny, so I repeated back to him what he said to show that I was paying attention and listening. Balwani to Holmes. I need about a month of total free time to take over the device completely and move it 100% to .NET. This was in respect of software on the machines. Balwani to Holmes again. Normandy Lab is a fucking disaster zone. Glad I came here. We'll work on fixing this. Balwani to Holmes again. I'm taking over all the chem teams per discussion and will begin doing daily meetings. Now the point about these texts is that Holmes said that she was in charge of these areas and Balwani was taking them over. She said that Balwani was not self-critical and blamed others for poor performance. And about the loving texts after the breakup, it was a process, Holmes said. She would meet him, for example, after the church, after he'd left. General comments. What Holmes said to different people was informed by the experts in the company, scientists and engineers. Yes, the buck stopped with her, as she said, but she wasn't aware of everything going on in the company. She again repeated that she never sold a share in Theranos. Now, let me put my personal take on that. No, she never sold a share. I think that's factually correct. But the company did. Now, the money for those shares came into the company, and out of that money, Holmes paid herself up to $400,000 a year, had a house paid for, had executive assistants, security guards, gardeners. She flew first class to functions around the country. The defence are making the point that Holmes never benefited from any share sales, and with what I've just said, I think that is a wrong conclusion. Along the same lines, in respect of financial gain, Holmes says that she never got any proceeds from the sale of her and Balwani's joint house when the company that bought it dissolved. And then the defence finished. We're nearly in the Holmes straight, pun intended. The prosecution began their recross-examination. Trade secrets. Okay, so we did have a tiny touch on these eventually. Why not share them with Walgreens? Leach asks if it is because they didn't want them to know they were using third-party machines. Holmes agreed that Walgreens were partners and not the public. It had been established that she shared information with GSK, which is an inconsistent approach here. And the cross-examination finished, subject to some wranglings over a favourable customer experience report. The defence want it in, and the prosecution say that all the favourable comments are about price, and the judge agrees that it's not relevant. Well, that's all, folks. The defence and the prosecution will move to jury instructions, and the jury won't be there for this part of the trial. I think this is going to be tedious and somewhat excruciating if what I saw happened when some of this was addressed last Friday. And one final argument from the prosecution. The government is asking the court to dismiss Holmes' testimony on the Balwani abuse because the defence didn't call an expert witness to testify on this. As usual, we'll try to condense everything we've just heard down to the bare essentials. Please don't forget to like this video if you do, subscribe, and if you hit the notification button you won't miss out on future trial updates and other videos when they're published. Holmes' testimony in a nutshell. This was the prosecution. The military. Holmes never told investors or Parloff that the Theranos devices were being used in Afghanistan or placed on helicopters. Company knowledge. Yes, Holmes knew about things in the company and was kept well appraised of these. She knew, for example, that there were only 30 tests using the finger prick draws in around 2014 and 15. On the financial projections, we saw the discrepancy between the 990 million revenue promoted to investors versus the 113 million promoted internally. Holmes doesn't remember the specifics on this, for example what she told to Grossman, the fund manager and investor. Other. The Fortune article. Holmes agreed that multiple statements were incorrect. For example, Theranos does not buy analyzers from third parties. The investor materials. Holmes agreed she essentially had the final say. Venus draws. Holmes denies hiding the fact that they would do some Venus draws, but we saw her brother's email which shows a plan to avoid giving them to BDT investors. Safeway. She told their general counsel that Theranos does not have any technical issues. Ebola. She was telling the board that people were working furiously on it, and the lab director was not even aware of this. Gibbons. We saw a PowerPoint where he showed what Theranos wanted to do, and this was juxtaposed with the fact that Holmes was talking to Walgreens and Safeway only a month later about rollouts in their stores. The CMS inspection. This was very bad, but Holmes flew to an award ceremony while it was in process. Holmes doesn't remember the exit interview, but thought they were talking about what Theranos had done properly. She downplayed the report to investors. For example, she just said it was a few disgruntled former workers, and the defence were back. The defence established the point that the cash crunch in 2013 was not really a big issue because the company knew that there was $75 million coming in from Walgreens. Theranos capabilities. We saw that Gibbons told Holmes that Theranos 4.0 could do a large number of assays. The Fortune article. Holmes never said that Theranos didn't buy third-party machines to Parloff. On Balwani. On the control issue, we saw some more texts from Balwani where he's stating that he's taking over various things to fix them, and the breakup. This was a process over time and not an event, hence lovey-dovey texts after the apparent breakup. And generally, Holmes made the point that the buck stops with her, but she wasn't aware of everything in the company. The share sales. She never sold a share, and trade secrets. There was an inconsistent approach, as she did share with GSK, but not Walgreens. Again, on this final day of Holmes' testimony, I think the prosecution haven't really been able to hammer home key points in front of the jury. I wish I'd done things differently, and I don't know or I don't remember. Holmes used liberally, essentially to avoid the difficult questions. I read a quote from one commentator which I think summarises my take on this precisely, so I'll just restate it here. Why hire an assassin to do a job when they don't know how to twist the knife? Quite macabre, I agree, but this metaphor does work for me. And that's it. Thanks for watching. Bye for now.